Welcome to the BJJ Lab podcast, episode number 2. Today is the first episode where we have a guest.
Hello, Patrick. How we doing, mate?
Hey, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Alex Brooker. I just got back to Switzerland, more or less. Used to live here for a couple years, and then I've been gone for a little bit, and I'm pleased to be back. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I guess that's probably the best way to explain what I do. But now I'm more transitioning into performance psychology, where I'm finishing my PhD and spending most of my time outside of coaching people, studying. And I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for some years. Also, when I was traveling, I trained quite a bit. Haven't trained much in the last year. But that's also where we met back in the old glory days in Seebach. And I'm not quite sure what else to say.
Oh, that's pretty good. All right, so we don't really have a plan for this one. Like the first episode, I had everything figured out, a lot of talking points.
Mm-hmm.
So today we have a couple questions from the BJJ Lab members, and we'll just freestyle from there and see where we go.
Yeah, man, no, that sounds good to me. I like to freestyle a bit more. There were a couple real good questions from different people. I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but a lot of the answers to different ones is it depends a lot on the context and also the type of people that we're talking about. Because, it really depends what people are mostly spending their time doing. I guess there's a big difference between people that have been training jiu-jitsu, especially a lot for many years compared to those that are just beginning. Have they had any background in sports before or not? Have they done multi-discipline different sports such as, different running or swimming or gymnastics and, other martial arts too? Or have they come from, for example, an ice hockey background where they've got a completely different type of body than everybody else? So I'll try and talk a little bit around each question though anyway, just so that I don't get away with saying it depends.
So should we start from go through the different groups? Let's say like the most common one will probably be like the kind of beginners that are maybe have some sport experience but are like pretty new to sports.
Sure.
And I think that's where a lot of the questions also came from. Like I think the longer you do sports, also the more of an idea you have. But then we start with those, and then we dive a little bit more towards the guys that do it a little bit more professionally.
Sure.
Like more the athletes.
Sure, absolutely. All right, sounds good. Do you want to actually read out the questions?
Yeah,
though?
sure.
Or just a little bit of a, just so that people. I only have the key points. Yeah.
All right. So one we have was about hip mobility and strengthening the hips.
Yep.
So I think this is really, really important. Also, just to give some background, like for me myself, since I'm a software engineer, I sit all day.
Yep.
So for me, this has helped a lot. Like I had a lot of pain from the ATP, is it APT? Like the posterior tilt?
Yeah, but the anterior position.
Yeah, exactly. And
tilt,
I think since we have also a lot of office workers in the gym, this will be a good question.
And that's honestly probably one of the biggest issues that we're going to see with the majority of people that are working any sort of desk or office job, which I think the majority of people do at the lab.
And also the hip mobility is really important for BJJ, of course. Like if you play open guard, the better your hips, the better your guard.
For sure. And to be honest, this is something that I really develop a lot with all of the professionals that I work with. Hips are, you need to invest in your hips. These are really this is the power production side. And if the hips are off, then you can almost, guarantee that there's some signs of other issues further up the body. And with hip mobility, there's a few different things. I mean, a lot of people think that it's just that they're able to sort of stretch into a position. But, you have, different types of hip mobility. Are you able to, dynamically move well, or just, basically hold the splits, and then how are you moving your hips anyway? A lot of people then, they sort of sacrifice their lumbar spine and they go into hyperlordosis or, hyperextension. Just to sort of get some extra space. So that's one thing for me. I mean, in general, with all the different people that I work with, everyone could normally do with better glutes. Like a lot of people, they have sleepy glutes because they sit on them all day. That's a huge thing for me. Also, especially tight, on the anterior of their hips, like what we faced with you. So quadriceps are tight, as well as the hip flexors and psoas, etc. And that actually reminds me now, because there was another question about knee strengthening and avoiding injuries. And I know that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of people struggle with knee pain because they've got very tight quadriceps, and then they try to sit on their knees like in prayer position, like everybody likes to do. They sit on there with a very tight chain already, and then the patella tendon is stretched, and with the pressure on top, it sort of irritates it. So it doesn't take long for you to start getting some, inflammation in there.
So what would you recommend, like for guys who work in the office all day? What should they do to offset that?
I mean, I really like a sort of a basic quad and hip flexor stretch where the back foot is sort of raised. It can be on a chair or on a wall with the knee down on the floor.
So that's the couch stretch, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or
I was thinking maybe we could put up like some video links
Yeah,
at the
we
end
should
of the
do,
episode.
actually,
So
yeah.
like all the exercises that we talk about, like we can put up some stuff.
Yeah, we can do that. That's probably better. That one I like a lot because it's killing two birds with one stone. But the most important thing also, like a lot of people know they need to stretch their hip flexors, but what they're not doing is they're not maintaining a neutral lumbar spine. So with a lot of guys, I always say like to tuck the hips or squeeze your glutes hard. And what that does is it sort of locks you in place so that then you can get into a decent stretch. Otherwise, you sacrifice and you think that you're stretching. And you're like, oh, I'm so flexible, I don't feel this. But really, if you actually sort of tuck your hips and squeeze your glutes hard, you'd be so amazed at how little you can move. So that's a huge thing for me. Also, making sure, like I said, about the glutes, this is also important so that the adductors don't work too much, like what we see with one of the guys we were speaking about earlier on. I don't drop any names, but, people can suffer from, chronic adductor issues because their adductors are working more than they should because their hamstrings and glutes are not working as much. So that for me is a huge thing. And yeah, I think best would be to send some videos up. I mean, in my opinion, if you're doing a lot of, basic exercises such as, hip thrusts, lunges in each direction, but with, good technique, and you shouldn't really be suffering that much unless you're spending, which a lot of people do, 8 hours or more sitting on their ass. Or I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Well, whatever. There's no rules on here. We're not in the US.
No, it's good. So I think one of the most important things, and I mean we're gonna say this a lot throughout this, is your body's really clever. And it's called the SAID principle, and it's specific adaptation to the imposed demand. So basically, whatever you're gonna do over and over and over again, your body gets pretty good at it. So you sitting down all day long, or you're gonna get short, in those places, and your glutes are gonna go to sleep because you're not using them that much. So.
So you would say that, so you stretch the front and you strengthen the back. Would that roughly be the
exactly? Or more, even strengthen them and also like kind of turn them on.
Yeah.
They're two different things, and I think that's a huge thing that in every warm up I do with guys, there's a huge emphasis on the glutes and just sort of waking them back up. Even if guys have big strong glutes, they just need to sort of get them pumped up and going, and then that takes off a lot of pressure on the pelvis. So.
Would it also make sense for the guys that do BJJ to do something like before training if they have trouble with this? Or
I mean, I think absolutely, yeah. I would definitely agree with that. So maybe we could collaborate with something like this, like a little 5-minute video. The guys could be doing is 5 minutes of some hip work. I like to do abduction and adduction pulses. I like this a lot to get some blood flow in there with a bit of abdominal tension just to warm up this whole trunk area, and I think this is really, really good, and people will also feel better, and when they're feeling better, they train better. When they train better, hopefully they get better, and that's what we want. So
now coming also related to this topic with spending all day sitting, for me what also was really important was like stretching the chest, the shoulders, and strengthening the upper back, and also with the previous one, the abs. I think those are the main areas I think a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, then if we want to talk about abs too, I mean, this is a huge area that I don't think you can do too much.
Yeah.
You could probably argue that you could do too much of something else, but abs, I mean, a lot of this is postural muscle as well. So what that means is that we have to really do a lot of repetitions, a high volume and frequently. Abs are, abs and glutes, these are two things that should be on everybody's warm-up criteria. And, you know, you can really also do them to the level where they're almost kind of burning up already. And, you know, people will find after a couple of minutes they're good and they're not cramping up, or they shouldn't be anyway, unless they're very low fitness level, which, you know, some people are if they're just beginning. But, yeah.
All right, so we'll see if we can make a video for this. I think that would
Yeah,
help
I
a
think
lot
that
of
would be
people.
good. Yeah, I would like that for sure.
All right, now this is, for me at least, it would be a really hard question to answer. Maybe you have a good answer, but like, how do you distinguish good from bad pain? Like, one example I see a lot is when you tell people to deadlift for the first time, a couple days later they come back with like back pain, but it's just soreness. But how do you know if it's sore or hurt, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question, and you know, again, it depends a lot because it's all to do with, you know, there is of course bad pain, which can be from, you know, overworking or incorrect mechanics, and the body sort of sending pain signals. But then there's, you know, also good pain, which, well, you know, also good pain like muscle pain, muscle soreness, and just sort of general fatigue. I would say that, you know, the only way that you know is from experience, which might sound like a bit of an easy way out, but, you know, it all really depends on also your perception of how you're doing it, you know, because, you know, for me, bad pain, even a good pain, such as, you know, okay, you do whatever, you do some push-ups and, you know, your chest and triceps are really sore, and say your core too, for example. Is it still a good pain if you can't train for 2 days afterwards? I would say no. So, you know, same with lunges or squats. Okay, you're doing it with perfect technique and it's just the muscles that are completely destroyed. But what are we trying to achieve? What do we want to do? If we want to be on the mats, you know, as often as possible, and we want to be maintaining, you know, training every day, the supplemental stuff, like, you know, with strength and conditioning, people, I think they, or at least the way I see it is, this is secondary to what the athlete really wants to do. This is all supportive work. So even if you're taking something which could be very good for them, you can take it to the extreme, and then it also becomes not very good, you know, because also maybe chance of injury goes up too, you know. Say, for example, the push-up example, maybe there's going to be a little bit of inflammation in the elbows, then arm bar, you know, they're new guys, they're white belts, they're trying to hold on, you know, and then before you know it, they've got some, you know, could be, you know what I mean? So for me, again, it depends. And experience will certainly tell you, that's for sure. And because after a while, especially with a lot of the different professional athletes that I've been lucky enough to work with, they can sometimes already pick up on something that doesn't feel quite right to them early, and there's no signs to it. But, you know, because they're so in tune with their body, and the only way that comes is from experience. So, yeah, again, it depends.
So it would be good to say, like, if someone trains mainly for like BJJ, then they should not really be in pain in the first place.
Yeah, no, I mean, if people want to train jiu-jitsu, they want to be having fun. I mean, I think you should understand that there's gonna sometimes you have some pain, but on a pain scale, it shouldn't be, you know, like, for example, I've trained some people and we went too crazy and they needed to take painkillers for days afterwards because they couldn't, you know, sit down or stand up properly, you know. And this is, again, we did everything correct. We just did, the volume was not right. And then what did it mean? It meant he couldn't train the day after or the day after that. So for me, it doesn't matter how good quality the work was. It was too much. And it ended up becoming sort of, you know, a bad pain, even though he was like, oh, I've got the best soreness ever. It was like, you know, it was a mistake on my part for sure. So, and I think that's why it's also important to have, a guide in this sort of stuff, because people go balls to the wall, and at the end of the day, for me, everything is about slow cooking the process. You know, it doesn't matter how much you lift in 1 or 2 sessions. If you're not lifting 3 months later because you're injured or you're burnt out, then you're the idiot, and you shouldn't be doing that, because you can do very small incremental gains with very basic exercises for a long period of time, and your body will completely, you know, transform, especially with the accumulation of all of the other effects of what happened to that. So if you're feeling better each day and your body's moving better and you can drill better and you see success in your jiu-jitsu, you're more motivated, you keep coming back, you know, and then you start taking on bigger challenges, you're more confident in yourself, you start, you know, really developing in many different ways, and then it becomes a very good positive loop. So that for me is an important thing.
Yeah, this is actually, like, I've seen both. Like, I think since you work with a lot of like pro athletes, they're probably prone to do too much, right? But then I've also seen people, like, especially if you go to a regular gym, they do the same workout for years and years and they are just stuck. So I think, like,
Sure.
I think some people you kind of have to push to do more and some you have to hold back a little bit. But like, how do you find the balance between the two?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a good question. And, in some ways it's a blessing and in other ways it's a curse. Like, I mean, I spend most of my time dealing with, professional athletes from all different sports, and most of them, they're like racehorses ready to, go out of the blocks. And it's really about pulling them back. And, my job is really about doing less is more. Whereas with people at the beginning, of course you can do too much, but the rules change, and I think almost a little bit more. I wouldn't say is necessarily better, but I think that the line is very different, and you're trying to, if you can only do one push-up, and you do one push-up every day for the next year, you're not going to get that much better at push-ups. So you do need to sort of expand yourself and explore what your body's capable of. But yeah, I think it should be done in a supplemental way. So you should sort of go to a level of fatigue, but so I'm sure now that I've realized what I've said, some people are going to think, oh, I do 5 minutes of work, it's enough. Probably it's not. So yeah, it's just really hard to tell, because I've even seen it with people that are pretty good in sports. They struggle to get through a warm-up, which on the outside, if you look at just the program, it's like, oh, I can do that as a piece of cake. But if you do, the way I expect, say, for example, I mean, it comes back again to push-ups, but the way I get people to do push-ups, it's very, very difficult compared to how most people just sort of go down and rock them out. So, do you know what I mean? I know it sounds annoying answer, but it really depends, and with the person, on the context, what day they've had, and this is where, coaching, and I'm sure that this too, there's like a scientific foundation, but then everything on top of that, it's art, and it's to do with, understanding people, and, a lot of experience and pattern recognition, and, your language with how you decide to communicate with people, and then, doing certain things, and seeing how the body adapts, and then just if going plan B, plan C, calling it a day at certain times, and sometimes just sit there and have a talk is also sometimes the best training that there is.
Cool. So I think, to sum it up, like, you have to do enough to get an adaptation, but
yeah,
like not too much. So like you want to recover quick enough so you can keep training.
Sure.
Right?
And I would say like this: if you don't know like how much is too much, just do it. Like
Yeah.
don't make
feel
no excuses.
like,
Just bite your lip and just do what you know is too much, so that you get the feeling of it. I mean, you're probably not gonna end up, I'm not advocating people to start, doing snatches or clean and jerks with too much weight and hurting themselves, but like pick a basic exercise, like, a static lunge, or something like this, or just some hip thrusts, and, do what is too many, just so that you have an idea of, okay, that's where my limit is, and it's important to, to take your body to the limit, and, especially when you want to improve. But I'm on the cautious side, and that's really because the people that I deal with, they're worth a lot of money, and, for me, it's really a supplemental training to try to enhance sports performance. But, even then, how much, this is where it gets also pretty tricky, because as someone else asked a really good question, like how to measure or record progress with strength and conditioning work, and how it relates to jiu-jitsu. And, you're going to find some of the best people in the world, they're, weak as a pair of socks, and, they have terrible nutrition, and they can't do anything compared to what you can do in the gym, but yet they're still world champions. So, you know, I think everything has to be taken with a pinch of salt, and it certainly can help, you know, people. But the most important thing is, if you want to get better at jiu-jitsu, you need to be training jiu-jitsu all the time, and that's important.
Yeah, so that was actually something quite a few people asked, and that was like, how do you like balance the two, and like how can you still recover from doing both? Because I mean, just knowing from myself, it is tough, like especially if you train almost every day or even multiple times a day. If you also fit in some strength and conditioning work, it can be tough to recover. So how would you balance it?
Yeah, I think also, you know, trial and error is really important, because everybody has different levels of like work capacity, and that comes from, you know, their current fitness state. It comes from their background in sport, in history. It comes from, you know, honestly, like, you know, how much sleep that they've been having, how much stress level they've been having. There's a lot of different things. I think the most important thing is to just sort of try it out, and you know, you'll know when too much is too much, you know. And I think a lot of people are worried about, especially like beginners. Now I'm talking about beginners, not pros. Beginners and sort of amateurs, they're really worried about overtraining and things like this. But honest to God, like they're not really there, you know. It doesn't really seem to be like it. It just seems to be like they're tired, and, you know, they're having a bad time at work, and maybe going home and things at home are not so good. So it's just there's a lot of stress in the body rather than there's actual, you know, physical exhaustion coming out. So, you know, what I would always recommend is, you know, slow cooking things. So if you know you train, what's the average? How many times do people train jiu-jitsu?
I don't know. I think for the recreational athletes, I think 3 times a week is like an average. Like if you hit like one of the fundamental classes once, but it really depends. Like it comes from once a week to 6 times a week. So there's a big range.
So maybe then, like, for example, if you want to start, you know, strength and conditioning, I would go, you know, try once a week at the beginning. Okay, how does that feel? And then the second week, look to do 2 times a week. How does that feel? You know, and maybe do a couple weeks at 2 times a week. And then the next month, you know, start to incorporate maybe 3 times a week. I mean, you know, people got to remember, like, you know, it's all about long-term consistency. I mean, you don't get a black belt in 1 month because you trained, you know, 3 times a day for a month, right? It's about all of the results that people are going to get in athletic development usually take a while to build up. So it's about long-term consistency and fitting it in with your schedule. And, you know, there's so many different factors with people. I mean, it's quite interesting when you try to build a schedule with different people, because, you know, people are usually quite unaware of how much time they spend doing different things. And, you know, people have many commitments. So jiu-jitsu is one thing, strength and conditioning is something else, and also not all strength and conditioning is the same. You know, if guys are sort of going to yoga once a week, it's very different. It's a different load on the body than, say, for example, you know, weightlifting. You know, there's many different things. So, but I would say slowly try to integrate things. Take your time. It's about long-term consistency and building habits, so that then you're not going to stop. And it should be something that's sustainable.
Yeah, like what I always tend to recommend, at least in the beginning, is like do as much jiu-jitsu as you can, and then if you have some gaps in your schedule where you can still fit stuff in, then do like a little bit of strength and conditioning. But that's like more like the weightlifting stuff that's harder on the body. Like the rehab stuff, I think that's like, especially like the stuff we talked earlier about, like if you work in an office, that's stuff you can do on the mat, like before training, after, and that should be always in there. But then I try to fill as much your schedule with as much jiu-jitsu as you can, especially in the beginning, and then a little bit of strength and conditioning. Once you get a little bit more advanced, and like for the pro athletes, I think it changes, because like once you're a high level black belt, then you're not going to get that much better in a session of jiu-jitsu, but like a little bit of strength or extra conditioning might actually win you the match a little bit more.
Absolutely.
But those terms are somewhat limited, right? I mean, if you hit the gym for a year and then you stop for a year, you're probably going to be back to square one, or at least close. But if you do a year of jiu-jitsu, even if you stop for a year, you still have the knowledge. So in the beginning, the jiu-jitsu is a lot more important, I think.
For
And
sure.
then the more you progress, then the more the other things start to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that completely.
As long as you stay healthy, of course, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I don't know what's the goal of that's why I don't like really the term strength and conditioning, and I think that like it's really about like physical preparation, because what are you trying to do? I mean, some people might do jiu-jitsu just for a bit of fun, and they do strength and conditioning to look good for the summer, maybe. But if you're doing it because you want to improve in jiu-jitsu, then jiu-jitsu is the most important thing, and you're doing everything else as supplementary. But it's your responsibility to be taking time before or after sessions, maybe just for 5 minutes, to do a little bit extra on warming your body up, so that then your performance is going to be better immediately in the training. The chance of non-contact related injury reduces down too, and then at the end, you could spend 5 minutes on just, okay, that your shoulder mobility is bad, and you can be doing some, different work on that, because, that's a risk for you, if you end up getting Kimura or something like that. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So that would be so it really depends on the goals, I guess. I
Yeah.
remember hearing a podcast or a YouTube video from a pretty big strength guy. I don't remember, but like he also does jiu-jitsu, and he said like you have to find out where you are on the range between like how important is jiu-jitsu for you, how important is strength training for you, and then balance it somewhere in between. Like let's say you're like really want to look good, or you're a bodybuilder or a power lifter, and you do jiu-jitsu for fun, you're gonna approach training completely different than
Sure.
if you do a little bit of strength and conditioning
Sure.
because you want to win jiu-jitsu tournaments.
Sure.
And I think everyone is on a range somewhere in between, and
Yeah.
then once you know where you
Yeah.
are, then you can set your goals
Yeah.
and approach your training the
Yeah.
right way.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the most important thing, man. It's like, and this is, from my experience. I mean, I worked with different teams, pro sports teams as well as pro sport individual athletes, and this is one of the difficulties that you have, because every individual is so different, and really that's why context is the most important thing for all of these questions, because, honest to God, hip mobility, you take 10 people, okay, maybe there's a little bit of similarities, but then there could also be so much different in terms of movement mechanics and, previous injuries from the ankle on one side, which is causing, like there's so much different things. But, as basics, like basic fundamental things, like what you said, I mean, jiu-jitsu at the beginning is the important thing, and why you're there is to get better. You want to see improvements in it, otherwise why would you keep going, right? And by building it up nice and slowly and increasing the jiu-jitsu sessions, then after a while you can do some other things to sort of try to improve it a little bit, if you have the time and energy to do it. You know what I mean? Because also some people find it boring, and it's not that important, especially well, anyway, there's way more we can go in. Let's change question.
All right, I think actually we can slowly wrap it up since we're running out of time here.
Yeah,
And we'll probably record another episode soon.
for sure, man. Yeah.
So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank
and
you.
That was
Yeah,
really helpful.
I hope it was. Yeah, hope it weren't too much. It depends, and going around in loops. But yeah, I hope there's something for everyone. And thanks.
All right, cool. Thanks, and see you next time.
Yeah, cheers, man. Bye bye.